Glad to be with you this morning as we talk about the Word of God. Big G versus little g. I've spent a couple weeks ago talking about, in the college class, the propensity we have as people to get caught up in worldly things versus the big thing, big God, big G. And we have a tendency to make a lot of little gods in our life. For example, a day in our life, and I just sat down and used a couple minutes just to think about the different things that keep us busy, that occupy our time, that occupy our resources. Church, spouses, family, kids. You can look at that list, see all the different things on there. I didn't even put eating or sleeping, I don't think. We got to do that too. But you get my point here, that we are extremely busy in this life that we lead. We're just bombarded with so much stuff all the time, and it just comes at us and comes at us and comes at us. And every now and then we swim up to the surface and take a breath. And then boom, we're bombarded again. Some are nodding. You understand what I'm saying here? That type of existence can bring about 5 different things that are really spiritual killers. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. The first is we have a stifled sacrifice. The second one is this sense of victimhood that pops up. We get confused by what our roles are actually supposed to be as Christians. We can become divisive in the church. And finally, we have a passive discipleship attitude. So I want to talk about those 5 things. And hopefully this morning, you will leave here maybe a little bit angry at me. Wouldn't be the first time. I'll tell you full disclosure, and you guys, you all have heard me say this before. When I get an opportunity to talk, and by the way, I'm not the preacher. I'm filling in for David. So don't judge this church by what you hear this morning. But when I do have an opportunity to speak, 9 times out of 10, I talk about the issues that I personally am struggling with. So if you ever want to know, I wonder what's going on in Craig Allison's life. What does he think? What's going on in his mind? What sins does Craig struggle with? I'm opening up the door for y'all this morning. You don't have to wonder anymore. You can go home and be like, wow, he really is messed up. So I'm just maybe confirm some of what you all are thinking. So first of all, I want to talk about stifled sacrifice here. What does that mean exactly? The idea of giving ourself, our time, and our resources to God's church. And in our society today, in the church today, and I'm not just specifically talking about Central, I'm talking about churchdom across our nation. We have stifled what it means to give sacrificially. And we have this balance scale a lot of times that we're like, yeah, I should give more. But oh man, there's all these things that I am responsible for, the kids, the family, food, and all this stuff that you've got to do. The previous slide that you saw, all of that stuff gets in the way and begins to interfere with giving sacrificially. We really struggle with that. Consider in the book of Acts what sacrificial giving looked like. I'm not even close to this. These are church members who are selling all that they possess. They're selling their lands and they're taking the proceeds and they're laying it down at the apostles' feet for the church. I'm not even close to that kind of sacrificial giving. We have this approach. I call it backward budgeting. And a lot of times what we do is, we have what's left over. I know some people that sit down at the beginning of the month, maybe you're one of them, that thinks about, okay, I'm going to automatically take the top, the best of what I have to give, either financially or with time and resources. I'm going to take it before I spend it, and that is set aside for God. I don't do that. Many times my giving is whatever I've got left over. And that's wrong. That's not what we're supposed to be doing, because I let all those other things get into my life and make the vision blurry of what I really ought to be focused on. And I look at the contribution from time to time, and I see, again, across the board, many churches are under budget. You know, they set a budget, and we fall under it, and we have this deficit to make up. And by the way, this is not a sermon on giving, okay? It's because every time the preacher preaches on giving, the contribution falls off the next week. So I don't want that to happen. But I'm making a point here, which is simply this. The Lord's church, as members who love God and love the church, we're in love with it. The church is our obsession. We think about it all the time. If that were the case, every single person in here is giving sacrificially, there would never be a point where the leaders of the congregation or the elders of a congregation are sitting down and saying, well, we're $2,000 under budget again this week, or this month we're a total of $5,000, $6,000 under budget. The problem would be, what do we do with all this surplus week after week after week? It's never under budget. It's always over budget, because God's children are giving sacrificially. How do we spend this money in God's kingdom? How do we spend all this extra that we have to further God's kingdom? How do we do that? That's the problem. Wouldn't that be something? Same is true of, we have a backwards time. What we are left with at the end of the week to give time to the church. Because giving isn't just about money, it's about yourself, giving of yourself to the church. Is it not true that what we really care about, what we spend time pouring our physical labor into, are the things that we care about, the priorities in our life? That's where we give. And if that happens to coincide with some church work, great. We can feel good about that. It's kind of like a marriage. I have been so guilty in the past and still struggle with giving my wife and my kids the leftovers. I give to everybody else, and at the end of the day, I come home and they get what's left over. Shouldn't be that way. I didn't want to say that this morning, but I did. If church is a thing that we do, not who we are, it's never going to be number one. Church should not be a thing that we do. Church should be a thing that is inculcated in us. It is who we are. It is what makes us us, our identity. You know, we talk about multicultural diversity all the time. You know, it's one of the things that are going on. There's no black, there's no white, there's no Greek, there's no Gentile, there's no slave, none of that. Who we are is God's church. We are His people. That's what should obsess us. That's what we should think about. So that's the scripture that comes to mind, Matthew chapter 6. Where's your treasure? Where is it? Is it in your homes? Is it in your 401k? Is it somewhere else? Because wherever your treasure is, that's where you're going to find your heart. So some of the obstacles to godly sacrifice. We have a worldly perspective instead of a spiritual perspective. Focused on materialism, things that we want. We justify why we don't give of our time and our resources. We have this justification process that we go through. And maybe we don't really like the way the worship service is at a church that we attend. So we justify, we're like, I can't really give of myself and my time and my money because the worship service just isn't fulfilling me. I don't feel inspired when I leave worship service. I'm sorry. Didn't know worship service was for you. I thought it was for God. Or maybe we don't agree with the mission statement of the church or the things that the church is supporting. We'd rather that money go to something else. And so I can't really give my time or my money to that because I don't really agree with it. Or maybe the direction that the church is taking. A lot of people will withhold, they won't give sacrificially because they don't agree with the direction the church is taking. I've seen that. Or it could be something as simple as just having personal conflicts. Don't like the leadership, don't like the elders, don't like the deacons, don't like the campus minister, the preacher, the youth minister. Personal conflicts. So we use that as justification to justify giving sacrificially. And understand what that is. I mean, you boil this all down, it's guilt. You know it, I know it. It's just guilt. And we don't like to feel guilty, so we try to justify it. So this whole attitude leads to this second thing I want to talk about, which is this entitled victimization. Man, oh man, do we have a love affair today with victimhood, right? It is all over the place. Someone has done you wrong, and so you're going to let everybody know about it. Social media is now a great platform for proclaiming just how victimized you are. Just how victimized we are. And the better it is, the more victimization that you have. And by the way, I'm not minimizing being a victim, okay? Don't get me wrong there. But I'm just talking about the daily living, all the squabbles, the little, pesky things that just irritate you suddenly become these huge things that are making you some type of victim. Nobody likes to be wrong. I don't like to be wrong. And society I've gotten swept up in that type of victim current that's taking us all along. Maybe you're immune to it. I'm not. I've been swept up in it just like everybody else. Because there was a time, somebody could say, Craig, you're flat out wrong on that, brother. You're like over here, and you need to be over here. And my response was, yeah, okay, you're right. And kind of, but I accepted it. I didn't turn myself into this huge victim because I had been corrected on something. And now, I'm not as predisposed to do that as what I used to be. And I have to wonder if it's just not how society is slow into our lives and making us think, you know what, this is the right thing to do. To feel like we're part of this victimization. Feels good. I mean, some of this stuff is kind of simple. It just feels good. Have a pity party. And really what that is us trying to reestablish control in our life. How do we respond? Well, we're going to respond in such a way where we feel like we get some control back into our lives. Being a victim enables us to shift responsibility onto other people. That's a big motivator. But the big thing, it diminishes our faith. I want you all to clue into this. We become afraid to commit to something. We have this ideology that gets in place. And look at King Saul. Here's a guy literally bigger than anybody in the entire nation of Israel, physically, bigger than anybody. If anyone in Israel was capable to take on Goliath, it was Saul. And he was afraid. He did not want to step out in faith and know that God was going to work through him to defeat him. So what happens? Somebody else comes along to do the job for him. He shifts that responsibility, and because of it, he loses his kingdom. He doesn't do what he was supposed to do. These are all interconnected. Because when we get set in this type of victim framework, we get confused about what we're supposed to be doing, what our role actually is. So my question, who are the ambassadors of Christ? You can say it. Anybody? We are. Wait. Hang on. If I look at 2 Corinthians, no, you're wrong. It's not we. It says here David Schonhoff is the ambassador for Christ. Whew! That's a relief. We are the ambassadors for Christ. As a matter of fact, when we talk about roles, and I think the church needs to hear this more, when we talk about roles, job descriptions, we, including David, got set up, and I'm just not really sure how to approach that, how to work through that. I can count on my hand, one hand, in the 10 years that I've been a campus minister, that somebody has come and asked me to be a resource for them, to help them out. It's a not my job mentality. That's dangerous. Because when we begin to shift that responsibility, when we look at this idea of saving souls, saving ourselves, and saving other souls, and we begin to shift that responsibility onto somebody else, let me tell you, we are on dangerous, perilous ground. We are confused with what we are supposed to be doing. You individually as a person, what is your job? If you think, the Bible studies and going out and trying to evangelize people, that's really church leadership. That's where they are comfortable. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Biblically, theologically, here it comes. Can you accept responsibility for this? You're wrong. If that's the way you think, you're wrong. I don't know when youth ministry became a thing. The research I've done on it around the 60s, early 70s, came on the scene. We got a little off base on that because all of a sudden our youth became the responsibility of the youth minister. And the role shifted, and Pew Research has done some really interesting studies on this. The role at home, mom and dad guiding the youth, being the image of Christ for their kids, Imago Dei, modeling Christ behavior, sitting down and having Bible studies with your kids, shifted and now became the youth minister's job in the 3 hours a week that he saw your kids. What? I hope that is not the mentality of Central, to put the expectation of salvation of your children on a guy that only sees your kids 3 hours a week and on some youth events and stuff. That's your job as parents. What the youth minister ought to be doing is going to the parents and saying, hey, you've been studying with your kids this week. Here's some material that we're looking at in class. I'd like to give that to you, and maybe we can work tandem in this. So they're hearing it at home all the time, and they're hearing it from me. And if I can be a resource for you, if there's stuff I can give you, just call me. I'll be glad to do that. That accountability, that instruction, that providing the resource, that stuff goes in. But it's mom and dad's job at the home to be doing that. But we've shifted that because we're confused about our role. And confusion leads to needless, underscore that word, needless division. There's a lot of infighting in churches. It's not uncommon. And I have to ask the question, why? Why so much internal squabbling in churches today? Stifled sacrifice, because we're focused on physical stuff and not spiritual. We have a victimhood mentality. All the problems are somebody else's problems, and we're confused with our role. Church work is not my job. It's not what I'm paid to do. But I think the biggest reason for why we have division in the church is that we have failed to develop good and meaningful relationships with each other. I know the college students, they hear me talk about this all year long, every year. Craig and his relationships, that's all he talks about. Because it's the vital key, it's the concept, it's the groundwork by which we establish a loving relationship with our church members. So we actually want to go to church and be with them. We enjoy being around them because they're family. Deeper than even the physical blood, we are tied by a spiritual blood, and we recognize the fact that within the blood we have royalty coursing through our veins. We are princes and princesses of God Almighty the King, and that is something that unites, not divides. Y'all, I am guilty of this one. You don't have a relationship with somebody, you don't know somebody good. Watch those fingers point. Yeah, did you see him? Can you believe she's doing that? I didn't know this 10 years ago when I took the campus minister job. Some of the most hurtful things that have ever been said to me were from church members. I thought, whoo, man, Craig, you provoke people. That's the problem. You provoke people to wrath. You just push their buttons. That's what my family will tell you. I'm good at that. I'm like that. I'm Peter-esque. Give me swords and give me ears. I'm going to chop them off. This is the Vincent van Gogh sermon. Not really. Well, maybe it is. But it's true, and I've talked to other ministers. They've told me the same thing. What's that about? The most hurtful things coming from within the church. You got to have thick skin. And that's not that. We'll move on. Ephesians 4. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Y'all know what malice is? Have you ever looked that word up? It's to do something for the pure enjoyment of causing pain to somebody else. Not revenge. They haven't done anything to you. You just enjoy making somebody's life miserable. Like chia pets. Who came up with chia pets? Scooby-Doo should not have plants growing on his head. Chia. You know the Greek word for malice? Kakia. So y'all will not forget that Greek word for malice now. Just remember, chia pets. Chachia, kakia. Moving on. Talk about passive discipleship, because this is where we're coming down to. And I've got give me 5 more minutes here. We're going to wrap it up. Lukewarm Christianity has become the norm. We have traditionalized lukewarm Christianity. You know it's true. Traditions become law. And it's this don't rock the boat thing. This is the way we've always done it. And so as I look across the spectrum of Christianity, I see more and more churches just sort of sitting down and just like, okay, doing church stuff again. Lukewarm. But it's what we do. That's how we do church now, right? We don't like those people that come in and say, let's be radical with our Christianity. Ho, ho, wait. No. Every person here should be actively working to reach, and this is, don't think, when I say radical, I'm not talking about like unscriptural stuff. I'm talking about first century thinking is now radical. So we should all have this mindset that we are actively working to reach the unsaved on a regular basis, whatever that looks like for you. If you're not having, if you go through an entire calendar year, y'all listen, if you go through an entire calendar year and with all the people that you work with, that are in your social circle, that are unchurched, they're unsaved, they don't know Jesus, they don't have a church congregation. You go through an entire calendar year and you have not sat down and had a Bible study with that person, there is a red flag there. Before I became a campus minister, years, not one calendar year. Like I haven't really reached out to anybody and talked about Jesus Christ. Passive discipleship means church does not consume us. It's not our obsession. Church is a get in or get out event. So where do we stand? Can this accusation be leveled at you? Because passive discipleship is non-sacrificial. It's excuse-driven and fueled by victim mentality. It's a product of role confusion. It is divisive. And it's not salvation-driven for yourself or for others. And lastly, it's just disobedient to God's word. Right there it is, Matthew chapter 28. Jesus' last words on this earth. He was so consumed by the need for us to understand how important it is to not be passive evangelists, to not be passive disciples, but to actively seek out. Are you praying for people to come into your lives that you can talk about Jesus Christ on a daily basis? Because if you do, be prepared, because God will put people in your lives to evangelize. He will. This is a hard lesson. I can tell because y'all are somber, y'all are thinking, and maybe you're thinking of excuses right now. Maybe you're thinking of reasons why, Craig just needs to be quiet. He doesn't understand my life. He doesn't understand the things I've got going on. Let me tell you, when I wrote this sermon, I got mad at myself. I'd think about a piece, I'm like, if I'm going to be really, really honest with this, I need to put this in here. I need to think about this. I need to self-reflect. And I got mad at myself. I really did. I'm having this conversation in my head. Well, you're stupid, Craig. Kids, you shouldn't say that word. But I mean, that's kind of, I'm like, you goofball, you can't do. And then I'm like, no, but you should. So the perspective on this, we're coming up on the 4th of July. So I got a little firework there. Each one. Reach. Just one person. That's just start off with one. Don't think I'm gonna evangelize and bring to Christ 20 people this year. Just one. Just think about one person that you know in your life that you can reach. And teach them about the hope of salvation. Teach them what Jesus Christ did for you. We're going to close with this to really hammer this down and cut off a couple years. If you had 1 year from today Jesus comes to you this afternoon when you get home, and you're not hallucinating, you don't need medication, it's Him, and He comes to you and He says, Daniel, you have 1 year from today. I want you to bring one person to Christ. 1 year. Everybody, 1 year. Today, Jesus is talking to you. I want you to bring one person to me so they can be with me forever. I don't want them lost. And if you don't, Because the world's going to end in 1 year from now, and you're going to stand before my Father, and you're going to be held accountable for your activity in the kingdom or your lack of activity. Because you didn't save your other people's souls, and in that you got complacent. So you will be judged righteously. You will be judged accordingly. And I'm telling you that if you do this 1 year and you reach out to somebody and you bring them to Christ, you have 1 year from today to do it. Can you imagine what would happen? Because that is the perspective that we need to be looking at our Christian lives through that lens. Because we don't know when Jesus is coming back. It could be this afternoon and we don't even get a year. Y'all need to understand this important thing. If you have not reached out to a person in the last year, shame on me, shame on you, shame on this church, shame on us. No, I'll tell you what would happen. If Jesus showed up today to me and said, you got 1 year or else, I'm telling you, within the next 2 weeks, I'm not waiting until month 9 or 10 to start looking for somebody to tell somebody about Jesus. I'm on it. Who in here would not? I mean, seriously, think about that. But this isn't some made-up weird scenario. This is what happens. This is what's going to happen. Why are we not actively discipling this world? Because the field is ripe. There are so many people that you and I run across on a daily basis who do not know Jesus, and we just pass along because we're lukewarm. We got a lot of little G's to feed, and we are not focused on big G. And if we were, and again, I stand as guilty as everybody in here, this building would not have any room for one more person. It would be packed. The power of the gospel has not diminished just because of all the craziness that is in this world today. The power of the gospel is still real. People are still being reached. Hearts are still being receptive and open. The Christian Student Center is a testament of the mission work that's done here. We've baptized 50 people. 50 students have been baptized because they're open, because we have students that are willing to sit down and build a relationship and then be in the position to talk about Christ to them and be taken seriously. Thank you for your attention to my words. It's intense, I know that. I meant for this lesson to be intense. I meant it to be a lot of things. But not to purposely hurt, not to purposely make anybody here feel bad, because again, I want you guys to understand this. This lesson is pointed at me probably more than any of you in here. I need to hear this. I need to be motivated by this. I need to do better. I need to give more sacrificially. All of that stuff. Where do you stand today? That's all. Where do you stand? Think about it. Sorry, I went past the 5 minutes. But if you need a change, if you need to refocus your life on the things that I've talked about this morning, we have an opportunity to get things situated. Pray for you. If you've never responded to the gospel, I'd love to have a Bible study with you. Let me get to know you. Or anybody in here would love that opportunity. If you have a need, Mike has got a song, we're going to sing an invitation song. I'd encourage you to come down as we sing an invitation song. Let's all stand and sing.
Once I stood